Welcome to Political Trade Secrets, an inside look at campaigns and politics, where we pull back the curtain, look under the hood, and investigate all aspects of politics and how elections are won. Now, here's your host, Dustin Olson.
And welcome to Political Trade Secrets. I'm your host, Dustin Olson. It's great to have everybody streaming in here from across the internet. We're going to have a very special show today. We're going to be talking about opposition research, the black magic of politics, with Naji Filali of Percipient Strategies. I'm really looking forward to this conversation. This is one of the secret weapons that you can have for your campaign if you want to really know the landscape that you're dealing with. So we're going to be talking about that, and I hope people really enjoying that. And you can also join the conversation wherever you're streaming in from across the internet. We're on 12 different platforms right now, whether it's YouTube or Facebook, Periscope, for as long as that's going to last, or Twitter, wherever you're at, you can post questions and you'll be able to join the conversation. And also joining this conversation is my co-host and compatriot, compadre, also America's sweetheart, Sean Bartley. Sean, how you doing today?
Doing well. All true, by the way. So
exactly.
Appreciate that. So glad to be with you here today. I think this is going to be a great episode. Looking forward to the conversation, and already see comments saying that people are looking forward to the topic today. So I thought this might be something of interest to people as they kind of look at this. And I think it's what I'm really interested in is what is and isn't opposition research. And so, I think getting to the bottom of that for our viewers and listeners is going to be critical today. So I think that's going to be a good conversation.
Yeah, and I'm looking forward to it. Naji's a great guy, and we've worked with him on a couple of races, and it's going to be great to have him in. I think he's the research phenom out there, the up and comer. He's the guy that if you really want really good research, that you want to go to him and his partners. And here's a great quote or comment today. Great topic today. What should we do as future candidates to prepare, knowing that our opponents will be conducting opposition research on us? Thank you. That's a really good question. That's one of the questions I have as well. What are they going to find out about you when you decide to run for office?
Well, I think that's actually the first thing to realize, that others will do opposition research. Mm-hmm. So I think we think, oh, maybe I'm the only person who thought of this. Probably not. Mm-hmm. So just get that. That's I think that's a typical thing. We talk about it, knowing the battlefield, knowing what actually is going on, and we've talked about it quite a bit. The you on you, you on them on them on you, and the matrix, the message matrix that we have and employ. Mm-hmm. And there's no better tool to inform that than opposition research and a self-analysis.
Yeah, totally. You're going to have to do the research on yourself because they're going to do it on you. It's almost like in game theory, the prisoner's dilemma. The idea that you have two crooks and they get taken into different rooms and they're going to both be interviewed. And if one of them, gives up the other guy, they're going to get 1 year in prison. But if the other guy, stays quiet, then he's going to get 20 years. So everybody is going to have the incentive. They're going to do the research. Even if you think you're not going to do the research, you're going to eventually try to do the research at the end of the race. When you think you're about to lose, you're going to want to do the research. So might as well just get started at the very beginning and go for it. And might as well do that. And by the way, if you want the freshest political trade secrets, then you should text me at 202-918-3345. It's a great way to, one, get the link to the show. As you all know, who've been watching this program for a couple of months, every once in a while, one of the platforms will cause us some problems. So you can always get the program if you text me there. You'll get a link back. You can opt in, and then you'll get all of our individual texts. You'll be able to communicate with us. We also take questions for the show from the texting community, so please do text us at 202-918-3345. Also, if you would like to reach us by joining us as a Political Trade Secrets Insider. You can go to politicaltradesecrets.com and you can sign up to get exclusive stuff. But again, that's politicaltradesecrets.com, and join us to be a Political Trade Secrets Insider. And Sean, would you like to tell people how else they can be involved?
Absolutely. Look, are you thinking about running for office or want to find out how you can be the best powerful political leader you can be in your community, your state, in the country as a whole? Reach out to us at Olson Strategies. It's OLSON strategies.com. You can email me at Sean, SEAN, at olsonstrategies.com, or Dustin at olsonstrategies.com. We would love to have that conversation with you today. And we're also we have a new crop of interns and fellows starting with us. So join us in that as well. Again, just email us at our addresses if you're interested in learning more about that. Again, that's olsonstrategies.com, and you can email me, Sean at, or Dustin at. So reach out to us there. We're also proud to be sponsored by Grassfire. What do? It's all of the one-on-one, human-to-human interactions that a campaign or an issue can have. Look, if you're trying to access the ballot through petitioning, no one does it better than Grassfire. Canvassing, this is the communication right on the doorstep with a voter. Make it count, make it impactful with Grassfire. Have that live phone conversation, make the difference for your campaign. It's www.grassfire.us. They also fuel 10centtexting.com. This is your way to connect with your voters, your constituents, right where they are on their mobile device. Image, GIF, short video, right there in the body of the text message. Maybe after you've done the research that we're going to talk about today, you've developed this great ad that really gets to the heart of what you want to do. You can put that 15 or 30-second ad right in this text message and get it out to the voters who need to hear from you most. Really can't think of a more impactful trio to come together and make the difference for your campaign. So that's 10centtexting.com.
I'm amazed by how much people can actually have a conversation over text with whoever they're reaching out to 50,000 voters, that their voters are actually going to end up having a conversation with if they're willing to actually do that, if the campaign and the candidate.
Yeah, it is something that those conversations can make the difference too. I mean, just think about it. What is the study? I think the average person spends 8 minutes a year on politics. So if you can cut through and somebody actually sends you back a question, you've got their attention. They basically say, give me an answer. And you get the opportunity to engage. Or if you've asked them their opinion and they've shared it, make them, let them know it's valuable.
Yep.
And that's all something that can be done in 10centtexting.com.
Awesome. Well, thank you very much for that, Sean. And as we prepare to go into this conversation, I just want to give people a little bit of background on Naji. So Naji is formerly of the Republican National Committee in the 2016 cycle. He and his partners all worked at the Republican National Committee, which is known for having a very robust opposition research and just research in general wing of the party, and they all were trained in that. And that's really a master class. It's a high-level education that you can get in doing that. And he's also a 2014 graduate of Harvard University and a Fulbright program grant recipient. They lead a very aggressive research operation, all sorts of different types of research. He can tell us about that when he comes on, the different types of research that they do. But in particular, for us, we're always wanting to know more about our opponents and more about our own candidates so that we have a better sense for the landscape. So without further ado, from Percipient Strategies and America's Phenom of Opposition Research, Naji Filali. Naji, welcome to the show. How are you doing today?
Fantastic. Really appreciate the warm introduction as well. America's the next phenom. That's quite the quite the robust introduction.
Not the next phenom. You're the current phenom.
Far too kind. Far too kind, guys. Appreciate it.
Well, welcome to the show, and thank you. And it's a sincere compliment. You do really good research, and you and your team, and all the races that and the colleagues I have who have used you also. They all feel that it's very thorough and well done research, and they really do appreciate it, because ultimately it's a question as to whether this is the political intelligence that we all need, or is it the black magic of politics? And it's a little bit of both. You might call it the dark arts, but it is really the biggest and most important campaigns that we have been a part of. There's always been that one little bit of opposition research that makes the difference. I'm going to go ahead and just tell the story, Sean, the most intriguing version of this. Now, I wish I had Naji to be able to do this research, but mostly because I had to read a lot of books that I did not want to read. So I had seen on we had this opponent who was supposedly an author, but you couldn't really find any books by her. And I was looking at an Amazon review, and somebody had mentioned her erotic anthology. I'm like, well, that doesn't show up in her Amazon book list. No. So anyway, you went to Harvard University, so you're familiar with Boston. Well, the anthology is called Beantown Heat, and it's a series of three stories about Boston. There's a professor, there's a hockey player, and I can't remember what else. Anyhow, this was some risque, scandalous stuff, and it had been scrubbed from the internet, and we found it on some I don't know, some
cache
kind of
or something like
yes.
that. Yeah.
So we found them, and we finally were able to use search terms, and we actually printed off the book and sent it to everybody who was going to be voting in the election with highlights for the best parts and ear tagged and everything else. And it made the difference in that race.
It sure did. As one voter told me, I can handle a lot, but porn writer, I'm out. So
yeah, the more emotional the response, the higher the turnout, one way or another, right?
Yeah, and I wish you had been doing the research, because otherwise I wouldn't have had to have read the book. You would have been.
Oh, trust me. Over 4 to 5 years of doing this, I have come across plenty of content that parallels that. So no worries, I've got my fair share.
So my question to you is, how did you get into opposition research? Really, actually, first, how did you get into politics? Like, what actually drew you to being in politics, to working on campaigns and all that? How did it all get started?
Sure. I mean, as we were talking at the top of the show, before the show aired, we were, I was saying there's no real diploma or degree or course you can enroll in to say, I want to get into opposition research and politics. The nearest parallel is communications or journalism, something along those lines, kind of a research-oriented skill set to get into that. But going back to my political origins, I would say back around 2008, 2012, I was in high school, early in college. I was actually an early disciple of, you can say, the Ron Paul revolution, right? I was more of a libertarian wing of the party. My first internship in DC was actually on the Hill, the first intern class for Senator Rand Paul. So I got libertarian education firsthand in the DC office of Rand Paul, worked several other internships in and around DC. And then toward the end of college, funnily enough, I kind of got sidetracked from politics altogether and thought to myself, my real other passion besides politics being baseball, what a great dream job of mine would it be to wake up every day, go to the ballpark, a major league ballpark, and be like a Billy Beane style bean counter, if you mind the pun, kind of looking at baseball analytics and helping evaluate players with a research mindset. So I wound up taking, as you alluded to at the top, taking a Fulbright scholarship to go to Italy to conduct research, a public health angle on concussion protocols in Italian youth soccer. Now, how does that apply to baseball? Kind of tangentially related. It's a sports related topic. It has some research value to it. You can apply some algorithms, other theories to that to look at player development and player health. I pitched it around after the Fulbright around 2015 to Major League Baseball, to several minor and major league teams. I came close to a few internships at lower end of the salary spectrum. Then I got a call actually around late 2015 from an old colleague of mine at Rand Paul's office that the RNC was staffing up the research shop and the communication shop. So I came in to the RNC, had an interview with the research director at the time and the communications director at the time. I was offered a full-time job as a research analyst, basically, entry-level oppo researcher, if you will. And I guess the rest is history, right? I spent, I would say, 4 months at the RNC, learning the part of the investigations team, learning the nuts and bolts of how to FOIA for the various documents of use at the time, so the 2016 campaign, that being the Clinton Foundation and all their activities abroad and how they were getting aid money or interacting with foreign governments while she was at the State Department, or looking at, the notorious State Department email tranche and release of the Hillary Clinton emails. So a lot of late nights poring over all the fine details of that. And in the process, fortunately for me, I met 2 of my current business partners, Matt Lantazana and Tyler Ross. And post 16, we said, you know what, we have a skill set here. We have a lot of paths before us, but let's hang our own shingle out there and see what sticks.
That's fascinating. Sean, do you have a question about that?
Yeah. Well, so as you were getting into all that, I mean, for really our folks out there, this idea of FOIA, you just want to just tell a little bit about that. So just what is that exactly? And
Great question. I should have elaborated. I know I speak in jargon. I throw out acronyms all the time, like FOIA, RNC, et cetera, et cetera. People sometimes scratch their heads. So my New Yorker in me comes out and I talk so fast, so I got to slow myself down sometimes. But essentially, so FOIA is, in my opinion, like the base fundamental researcher's tool, right? It is a Freedom of Information Act request, and it is a federal statute that allows any member of the public to essentially go to a public agency that maintains custody of a public record, be that a voter file or a police record in certain states, or correspondence even between a government agency and a private individual or a private entity or other public body, and say, I, as a private citizen or a journalist, etc., want document X or Y. And with some exceptions for Privacy Act or other kind of roadblocks that are meant to safeguard personal protections, of course, you're able to obtain that and analyze it for whatever purpose you might have. And of course, that varies by context and what you're looking at. But at our RNC, our goal was to target correspondence, activities, grants, disbursements, all the like, that you might not find if you Google around because it is just maintained by a public body. But through the process of FOIA-ing a body, you're able to, if you're a journalist, for example, all the time you see this, you're able to obtain that record, put it into the public domain, write about it, and that's what you see on TV oftentimes, or read in the New York Times or other publications.
And every state has their version of FOIA, like in Colorado, it's a CORA request, things like that.
Yeah, they have funny acronyms. New York has the FOIL request. Colorado is the CORA. There's the APRA, which I find kind of funny in Indiana. But every state has their own analog, and they have their own little exemptions or their own requirements. So a funny fact, for example, in states like Virginia, Arkansas, and Tennessee, only actual citizens or residents of those states can actually access those records. So in those cases, we have to find a partner or another individual in those states who is able to, on our behalf, request that.
And I want to just point out, you mentioned Billy Beane, and I assume you're a fan of the book Moneyball.
Of course.
And so that's inspired a lot of people. And actually, for the audience, this book had a big impact on Ken Mellman, who was the political director in the Bush White House early on, and he told everybody to read it on the Bush re-election campaign. We all were told we needed to read this book, and it's actually what was part of the thinking that was behind the Republican National Committee's 72-hour Get Out the Vote program after the 2000 election. We were looking for how to do things differently. And it's a really good book that I recommend anybody who's interested in politics to look at it from a perspective. And this is something that we really love on this program. We mentioned our colleague, John Rogers, before the program when we were talking with you. He was an equities trader before he got into politics. And it's really interesting talking to him about his background in equities trading and what he learned. And he talked about how he learned about reversion to the mean, or mean reversion, and how he now applies that to politics. And had he not had that completely different experience, because as you pointed out, there's no degree to go do this. You can't really become political strategist or opposition researcher. So from your experience being a young Billy Beane, what did you really learn that you were able to bring into this domain?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think I've thought about this quite a bit, actually. And I think what it comes down to, Billy Beane was, famous both in the film version and the book version, for, paying attention to details that otherwise were ignored, right? Looking at on-base percentage, walks, etc. And I think what it comes down to, what distinguishes a good researcher from a great researcher is the ability to look at the fine detail, right? Anyone can, apply the same basic cookie cutter approach and toolkit and say, I'm going to use a subscription service like LexisNexis to aggregate all these news clips and just kind of pull out the tidbits that are interesting, right? That's kind of second or third degree work. Someone else, some reporter wrote that up and you took that and you're rehashing it, right? The really original stuff, from my perspective, is how can you deliver value at a level, that is distinct and original. And from our firm's point of view, what we do is we'll utilize proprietary tools like a social media scraper that will analyze, for example, Twitter or Facebook interactions or likes or activity that will show a pattern of behavior that might break from party orthodoxy or might show, going back to your earlier example, salacious or kind of personally out of touch characteristics that otherwise would evade scrutiny for a press release or for a news article. So the same thing applies to the public records component, right? If you understand your target candidate really well, you're able to understand, okay, this person served in a public capacity as, in a county agency or at the federal level. Let's look at their interactions with, for example, this company that happened to give this person money. Let's like give thousands of dollars as bundlers. Was there any kind of quid pro quo or pay to play politics? Let's target those interactions and derive original value that otherwise would be left on the table. So when it comes down to, the Billy Bean approach, I think it all comes down to level of detail and level of attention to factoids that otherwise might, miss the eye.
Yeah, I want to ask on that in particular. You mentioned patterns when you were talking there. How important are patterns when you're really laying out what you found?
Sure. Yeah.
Like strikes you're out.
Right. I would say it takes several, like more than two, at least two, to build out a narrative of behavior. So I know you guys know this from previous deliverables we've sent to you guys, but when it comes to building out a narrative, as we put it, whether it's financial or ethically kind of dubious activity, it comes down to saying, okay, let's say, for example, this person X owns a business, or in their personal life has accrued a number of tax liens or a number of judgments in civil small claims court. Okay, how many activities can we bundle together over, let's say, 2 decades, 3 decades, and show a pattern of behavior that shows that over the course of someone's lifetime, on a continuous basis, on a series basis, we have a pattern of financial impropriety or recklessness, irresponsibility as a business person, be it through lawsuits or otherwise, or just reckless, irresponsible behavior as borne out through court records or through personal activity online. And yeah, I wouldn't say there's any magic number to what it takes to build a narrative. I mean, in certain cases, if something is especially, shocking to the eye and is very, enticing, it can be one incident, and that can kind of be the silver bullet, the rare silver bullet, as I put it. But oftentimes it is more of that pattern approach to building kind of a paper cut campaign that shows over time we have this pattern of behavior that is likely to continue in the future with this person to be reelected or to obtain public office.
Yeah.
Well, and one thing that we've seen, and just tell us if it's true on your end as well. It's
Sure.
really in that pattern. Developing that pattern where you could see places that the candidate the opponent isn't even aware of, that you could get them to fall into again.
Yeah, 100%.
And so there are some real opportunities there. I know in other projects we've had before, we were able to see, people said, oh, the opponent is like, mean or disliked by the public,
Right.
And we test that, and the public really has no opinion on these people, or their
Exactly.
opinion is, oh, I've heard of them and I kind of like them. But what we really developed was the things that make the people that work with this person think that they're mean and hard to work with and whatnot. And really getting into that, well, what we really discovered is they were a contrarian.
Mm-hmm.
And so we were like, well, let's just give them opportunities to be contrary on things that 80% of people like.
Yeah,
And
right,
if
right,
and if that really is true, that that's who they are, they're going to fall into it. Like they cannot agree wholesale on
right,
anything.
right,
So we just gave them
right.
opportunities to fall into that. And I think that's
Yeah,
something that research can bear out too. And I don't know if you've seen things where the patterns have really been able to dictate how you can drive the
yeah.
whole, not just the message, but the campaign.
I think especially in cases where there's a political novice or someone who's a novelty in the political field, the importance really is to define the individual early, right? Because
Hmm.
the problem is oftentimes you look at like an entrenched politician like an Andrew Cuomo or someone of the sort, they have decades of governance experience. People are kind of set in their perception of who they are as a person, right? That's why for someone who's new to the field, it's important to start research early so you're able to, you know, 5, 6, 7 months out, even be able to begin to lay out that narrative, like, and kind of show how it's repeating itself. Oh, this person is mean, or this person is kind of unsavory in their personal beliefs, or is financially reckless. Keep peppering them along those lines, and prove, as you put it, they're going to keep falling into that. And that's how you're able to sustain that public image and have it borne out through field research or through an online or TV campaign to show that this is the entity that you're up against. This is who they are, and this is why you should vote against them, or in different cases, vote for them.
Yeah. Well, as we mentioned before, so people who watch the program regularly will be familiar with this, the message matrix. And Sean was talking about that earlier. Really, when we get clear-eyed research from you, in someone like you, but really from you start to get the sense from the you on you, the you on them, the them on them, the them on you, and it really gives you a sense, as what Sean was saying, the kind of psychology of the person. You start to have a real clear view. You see the entire race from all sorts of different perspectives, and because you provide such good research, you are award winning as an opposition research. Is
Right.
that correct?
That's right. I actually brought a prop just to show off. I got it in the mail yesterday, so I'm happy the timing was on point. But yes, we received that in 2020. We received the Reed Award for best use of opposition research in a New Jersey assembly campaign, actually, where we were able to obtain police body cam footage of an assembly candidate in New Jersey who had left his dog outside in the cold in the middle of winter, and a neighbor actually called the police, and they were able to get a hold of him. And we wound up getting all the audio of him in the cruiser trying to get in touch with him and getting no response, and ultimately kind of depicting this individual as someone who is anti-animal or anti-pet or just uncaring was very very damning. I believe he did lose that race as a result of that damning footage. So
Wow.
we're very proud of that. Yeah.
It got to the core to his humanity.
Yep, exactly. It not only turned off Republican voters who were going to vote against him anyway, but also turned off a number of Democrats who otherwise would have voted for him. A lot of animal rights groups actually were up in arms in his district over this, and kind of were able to suppress some of his enthusiasm.
Wow.
Yeah.
So, well, thank you for sharing that. That's pretty
I
remarkable.
appreciate it.
And that really is when you get to the heart of someone, when you get to like be able to really tell something, that is really the crux of this. And you mentioned something earlier, and I think it's important for people to see is that whether it's trying to get somebody to vote against somebody, and that's what we think of in opposition research, or for somebody. And so really being able to tell a story, a narrative that over time. So has there been some things, particularly in the self-analysis of a candidate, where normally you're looking for the bad things, but you really find like, oh, hey, there really is a story here that you might not have even thought about?
Sure, and I'm glad you brought that up. This is a prime time. I know 2022 is a bit away, but it's prime time, and we're getting a lot of requests at the time for this, for self-analysis, or as we call them, vulnerability assessments or vulnerability studies. And what that boils down to is whether you're new to the scene or have previously served in public office, looking at one's own tenure through the perspective or eyes of the opponent, be that in the primary setting or a general election setting, and seeing from the right and from the left how your record will be defined, how you will be attacked or criticized for one's own record. And in the course of doing that, oftentimes we come across, positive or beneficial assessments of someone's tenure or success in the field of business or law or public office. And we're able oftentimes to package that into the final deliverable, where we say, okay, yes, you will be criticized for your oversight of the manufacturing committee, for example, but at the same time, these jobs numbers were actually quite beneficial to your overall record and can be touted. So we call those kind of like response books, if you will, response to the opposition, which we sometimes get tasked to do as well. And oftentimes, people assume opposition research by virtue of the name is, tearing someone down, very destructive. But oftentimes the same toolkit that can, tear someone down can also build them back up. And so that's where you often find kind of a yin and yang to research. There is kind of two sides to that coin.
Well, I find from research books, when even on the opponents, I get a sense for where their strengths are. We also get the sense that we thought something might be there for an area of research, and there's nothing there. Like they actually did a better job than people actually thought. So you really, when you touched on the social media scraper, and and then also this vulnerability report, the audience got piqued their interest. So I think there's a question here: how important is social media in opposition research, and how is it used against us as candidates? So in thinking about the vulnerability study on oneself, and how the social media scraper works, I think people are interested in what do they have to worry about?
Sure. So social media, as everyone knows, but much like the internet, lives forever in many ways. So as a result of that, one sentiment that they expressed, let's say in 2015 or 2016, and how it's perceived in that context is very different from how we perceive the world, not even 5 years later, even a year later, or a few months later, right? I mean, you can even look at, those who are very critical of then candidate Donald Trump, were articulating a lot of views, circa 2015 and 2016, who then, for political purposes, would shift on a dime a few years later to obtain an endorsement or to obtain or curry party favor, were changing their tune. The problem was, for example, in that case, a lot of those individuals left their old tweets up. And as a result, all you have to do is screenshot that and put that into a document, and you're able to successfully depict that person as anti-Trump, even though they might not be anymore, right? So the first issue, of course, yes, is the kind of the time, the temporal piece to it. Opinions change over time, and older opinions are going to age depending on the context more poorly than others. Other examples that we've been able to point out, if you're an elected official, for example, social media is oftentimes fun to share with family and friends. Oh, I'm on vacation, I am traveling around, what have you. But in other cases, it can show that individuals out of touch or living in a lavish lifestyle or not in the district, not attuned to their own constituents' needs. So kind of the geotagged element of social media can oftentimes come back to bite you if you look at that level. And on top of that, I guess the final piece is what people don't really think about. It's one's likes and comments or conversations, what one might have in kind of these sub threads on Facebook or Twitter, and think there's nothing to it, or that it won't be picked up on. The problem is it gets picked up on quite a bit, and if one's liking a lot of Democrat pages, or if one is commenting favorably or unfavorably on certain issues, we're able to pick up on that and kind of tie it together to different networks and different associates that might paint you as not as staunchly Republican, not as staunchly conservative. And so there are a lot of different elements of social media that pose risks, and it comes down to the individual to either be more responsible in how they share content, or to if they are going to kind of maintain their authenticity, at least trim or clean up their past activity, which one can do by simply unliking or deleting comments or commentary.
Yeah, is that your advice for what people should do? You're thinking about running in 2022. You probably aren't going to announce till fall, maybe, or maybe the summer.
Yeah.
What should someone start doing now?
Yeah.
So that you on the other side don't find out what they've been up to in their nefarious life.
Right. Ideally, there is the rumor mill swirling around, so no opposition researcher has come around and screenshotted all your tweets or what have you. That's the best case scenario. So if you're really early in the process, yeah, I would, if you have the time, kind of go through past activity logs and make sure you are kind of cleaning up content that might be deemed either too insensitive in certain light, or it might depict you in an unfavorable light to certain constituencies. And it takes a judgment call. Sometimes an opposition researcher is needed to kind of just distinguish between that, understanding the kind of the dynamics at play. But oftentimes it comes down to one's intuition that this is not going to play well. This comment might be misinterpreted, and even the notion of misinterpretation is enough, I think, to draw someone's scrutiny. So it's always helpful to just unfollow or unlike or what have you.
Do you ever do a vulnerability study on somebody, and then basically it's well before they're going to announce, and you basically give them a checklist of, you need to get this stuff taken care of? Like, it looks like you have these unpaid tickets for parking tickets somewhere. Like, get this taken care of.
Yeah, 100%. Often, whether it's on social media or in the public domain, in certain cases, there are court cases that can be sealed and probably should be sealed. So it's as simple as filing a motion in court to even seal certain sensitive documents. And other times, there are realities where certain things can't be undone. Right? Some things remain in the public record. They're a news item, or they're just public record in a public agency, and no matter what you do, you can't remove that. At that point, it becomes a question of mitigation and using opposition research to prepare for that, and use a communication strategy that will blunt the negative impact of that. And that's where I think research becomes a valuable tool from a communications point of view to help plan out messaging. And this is I think that's evergreen and true for political arena as well as the private sector and the corporate arena as well.
Yeah, I think that I really love this part of the conversation. I think something else is, if you are thinking about running, take a pause before you hit that enter button.
Oh yeah, 100%. Yeah, I mean, there are those. I mean, everyone likes to throw a trial balloon out there. You see this nowadays, like happening right now in gubernatorial races, Senate races. Oh, candidate X or Y is considering running for office. From an opposition researcher point of view, or from a general consultant or other political professional, that's enough to trigger an alarm bell to make you want to take a closer look at that person. So if you want to throw a trial balloon out there, and that's fine and dandy, but what comes down to it is you have to be prepared for what that actually means, what kind of signal you're sending out there, and whether you will kind of sick the hound dogs on you, and that's what you want to avoid in certain scenarios.
Absolutely. It is unwise if you haven't gotten your house in order to do that. Right. By the way, I just want to make a point that just because there's stuff out there, part of what's going to happen with your opponents is they're going to take stuff out of context. So maybe it was innocent. Maybe you even accidentally hit like on something. I mean, that happens every once in a while, that someone will accidentally hit. I don't know if you had this experience where someone hit angry face on Facebook and you call them, you're like, why are you so angry about this? And they're like, oh, I didn't know I did that. And then they change it to a like. Right. So that happens. People do stuff like that. And, who knows what could happen to you. So it's not necessarily that you have real problems. Also, if you have a really complicated, perhaps, something related to business, the Trump tax returns, for instance, is a perfect example of this. There's not a single voter in this country unless they are, actually not even a single CPA. You'd have to have like a whole army of CPAs to be able to really understand those tax returns. Yeah. So there's never going to be a news story that's going to accurately portray those. Yeah. So you have issues like that. You just need to know how are we going to talk about it?
Exactly. And so oftentimes I'll be talking to a consultant or a candidate, and we'll run down for a vulnerability study, for example, going through the list of vulnerabilities, not even on social media, looking at their record as a public servant, as a governor or a senator, what have you. And they'll stop us and say, oh my goodness, like this lacks all nuance. It's like a sledgehammer. You're just saying all these crazy things because you're pulling at that one factoid and twisting it in knots. And respectfully, I say, governor or senator, like, this is how they're going to represent it. So, I understand there's a lack of nuance there, but, it's incumbent upon the team and on yourself to kind of message that appropriately, kind of add that nuance and color that otherwise will be missed in that campaign mailer or that ad, because it is not in the opponent's interest to, spell the nuance out for you. It's in your interest to define your record and make sure, it's an ironclad, unshakable truth.
Yeah, and we're getting some great comments on this. And so, in regards to the vulnerability assessment and the conversation that comes with it, Pat says that is the scariest conversation. It's right up there with a girlfriend saying we need to talk. So,
yeah, that is very
Agree with
true.
that.
And I think individual candidates are often afraid to, kind of express their own vulnerabilities themselves. So many candidates say, we start the process, oh, you're not going to find anything. I'm a Boy Scout. Nothing's there. And then we pull out this court record of, a DUI or some domestic incident. And we say, well, if you're a Boy Scout, can you explain this? And then, they turn silent. It's like, well, it's better for you to be forthright in this process because, even though you say you're a Boy Scout, the record doesn't lie,
Yeah.
whether it's,
It might be that it's perfectly innocent. The thing is, and this
Sure.
is that we've had people who are completely, above board. They're great people. They really didn't make a mistake. The thing is if you were looking through the research isn't going to tell you what was going on in their head at that moment. It's just what can you see from all that research and what is it, what kind of pattern does it start to present? And that's what's going to happen. And they're usually shocked. They're usually really offended and upset about it. But that's not what our intention is. We're just, this is what your opponents are going to say. And it's actually their job to say it about you.
Yeah, I mean, we actually had to add a disclaimer to some of our books saying, note, this is, not us attacking you. This is presented as a document as it would be prepared for an opposition campaign. And so that kind of, massaged some of the tension that early on we were getting, on phone calls or conversations where people were taking it very personally. And that's the nature of opposition research in many respects. It's very personal look. You might think it's all in the public domain, and so there's a degree of separation or distance there. But it is very personal, whether it's looking at a divorce case or looking at my personal, mishap from one's, youth. It's all it all boils down to one's, kind of 30,000-foot view of their life, and that is a very intimate, portrayal.
What do you think is the most surprising areas, or what are the most surprising areas that most candidates don't realize that an opposition researcher would be able to get eyes into?
That's a really good question. Yeah,
I mean, come back to it if you want to, but
yeah,
what is it that you think people would be like, wow, I had no idea that you could find that out?
Yeah, oftentimes people have no idea that police records are public record, that anyone, 911 calls from a residence in many states are public records with some exceptions. Voter tax files and voter files are pretty standard. Some states will block divorce records. So there are some releases of, individual divorce proceedings that are quite detailed that go into, when it comes to alimony or child support, that can provide a very stark portrayal of one's own personal behavior. And in many cases, those are the most difficult conversations I'd imagine that we've had in the past. But I'd say it's those more personal, kind of insights into one's personal life that really will stoke suspicion, or people question whether it's even legal what we're doing. And yes, it is legal. It's all open source information, so anyone can do this if they want to. But I'd say those are the more jarring elements. Everything else, a politician will expect campaign finance and office budgets and the like to be skimmed through and poured over. But when it comes down to those more personal municipal records, I always say all politics is local, because those local records really are the treasure trove of information that really can add different insight to one's character. So.
Yeah, I'm really struck by first, it is interesting how little some people know is public record to begin with. But what is the, how do you go about actually, you've talked a couple of times about the book. How do you go about actually creating that? Is there some methodology around that?
Right. The sausage making process, right? Yeah, I'd say there are several constituent components to building a robust book or dossier, however you want to put it. Not the Steele dossier, but that was a bit nefarious. But the actual dossier, as we call it. So I'd say first there is the records component, which goes into the personal vital information, the professional, the voter registration, the tax records, any lawsuits or liens, professional licensure. That's, I call, like, the nuts and bolts of one's own personal profile. That's, we tuck that in at the very beginning to give a broad overview of one's career arc and personal life. And then we go into the archival news, multimedia that includes podcasts like this one that can be retrieved for future use. There's radio interviews, there are YouTube videos, news hits, all the like, that we will dissect, analyze, and distill into relevant factoids, or we call them bullets, if you will, where we pull out the relevant factoid, give the supporting hyperlink or text, and the citation for use in a mailer or for other external facing purposes. And then, depending on the individual, there's oftentimes a voter analysis, a legislative analysis of one's voter history, be that meeting minutes at a local level or county level, or a state legislative budget or vote review at the state legislative level, or looking at congressional races, looking at one's totality of roll call votes and deciphering where an individual might have broken from the party line, might have sided with the other side, or taken votes that were not sufficiently conservative or maybe perceived as too liberal. So you put all that together, you have the nuts and bolts at the front, you have the narrative breakdown of top vulnerabilities broken down into narrative format based on all these.
When you say narrative breakdown or narrative format,
sure.
Explain what that means to folks.
Yeah. So at the top, I mentioned, for example, like, showing a pattern of behavior, right? We have financial, ethical, bad votes, not conservative. So based on the news and the multimedia and the legislative votes, we will be able to pull out and tease out the narratives that will show candidate X is a rhino, he's a Republican in name only. And so we'll point to all the votes or comments or statements or alignments that will show over the course of this individual's career in public service or in personal life, he has been not sufficiently conservative, or he's a tax cheat, he has all these liens, tax judgments, his business was shuttered and he stiffed his contractors, stuff like that. We will lay out so that one, just as simple as the document, copy and paste that into a media pitch deck, give it to a reporter, put it on a blog, and say, wow, look at this person. This person is XYZ. That's the big thrust of our book. We call the narrative section. And at the very end, we have an appendix that kind of is an overview, a policy overview, where we'll lump all the narrative bullets, categorize them into different sections where we'll say, okay, here is this person's view on abortion, or gun rights, or fiscal matters. So kind of like a reference section at the top where you can go into your table of contents, scroll down to the relevant portion that you want to make a press release or a statement out of, and there you go. You have candidate X, Y, or Z's position on that over time. So it's a pretty robust document. Yeah. Sorry.
No, it's amazing, and it depends on how long someone's been around on this planet as to probably how many hours goes into that. Yeah. Let's say someone's been in Congress for 30 years. They were in the state legislature for 20 before that. I mean, they're literally like a Joe Biden level of been in government for forever. How long does it take to do something like that? Yeah,
for someone that's that complex, very minimum, it would all hands on deck. It would probably take at least a month, but that's probably that was being too generous. I think it'll take at least 6+ weeks to get through all that if you were to kind of apply a whole of firm approach. And in terms of content, we have books as short as 50 pages, and we've had books as long as 700 pages for people of that kind of profile. I'd imagine that would be, on the higher end of an undertaking. And I think for a candidate like Joe Biden for the presidential race this past cycle, I'd imagine the team of researchers tasked with that probably spent the better part of several months, if not an entire year, producing volumes of content based on various narratives alone because of some, his robust public service tenure.
Yeah. Well, so one of the comments, actually, this is great, and it goes to what my next question would have been. Naji, do you send people based on budget out to the field to go to actual courthouses to do research? And the answer is, I know you do that. And yet there's two questions I have. What are the challenges and what are the trends going into this year and into 2022? We've had a pandemic for the last year. We also had, there's been a whole lot of like landscape shifting that's been happening in the last few months. So what are the challenges and what are the trends as you see them going into this year and next?
Sure. I'll answer the field research question first. I personally have been to many a courthouse and many a town clerk's office to obtain records that would otherwise be either too costly or difficult for the individual custodians of records to reproduce. So for someone who's been, for example, in county government for a decade plus, to ask a clerk to, scan thousands of pages or to digitize thousands of pages so they can email that to me or send it over a Dropbox or Google Drive is too prohibitive or costly, because you have to pay, in certain states, you have to pay the actual clerk by the hour to reproduce those records, or pay by the page, and that can be thousands of dollars. So in lieu of that, what oftentimes a client will do, or a candidate will do, will actually pay for us for travel and accommodation, sometimes to go to that individual custodian of records, inspect the record in person for free, take screenshots or photos of relevant documents as you analyze them, and then go back to your home base and include it into the research. That's what we've done in many cases. My favorite story of that was going to San Diego, actually, into the courthouse. You would think San Diego, wow, what wonderful, you're going middle of winter, nice vacation. I was sitting in a basement of a courthouse for 3 days, with breaks in between, of course, to keep my sanity, but just going through a several thousand page file to understand the relevant vulnerabilities. And it was high pain, but high reward. And it's those kind of insights, going back to your earlier comment about detail, that really can define a campaign and change the entire trajectory. But yeah, that's the field research component. And then when it comes to trends that we've seen in Oppo research, now COVID's impacted that. COVID had, in the early stages especially, really put a crimp on public records, especially. Town offices and county offices and federal offices closed down entirely. We still have, I believe, the National Archives and Records Center has been closed on and off now for months on end, and they're the repository of a lot of military records to prove someone who served in various branches of the military, as well as other vital records. So that kind of stopped altogether. It's coming back online now very slowly. And then,
has that affected FOIA requests, as an example?
Oh yeah, the most common thing we hear oftentimes is, due to COVID-19, we're experiencing a severe backlog. It'll take an extra several weeks, et cetera. So we tell clients, like, get us started early, because it's going to take some time to get some of these documents. I think they're getting back online now, more or less to full capacity, but there was, in the early days especially, a challenge there. Yeah.
Given that, do you think that there are some people that got elected based on the fact that being able to do a full, robust research was hindered during this time?
Yeah, I'm not sure how many we can, again, I can't give you a number, but I imagine at least several individuals were able to benefit from kind of the slow churn of these FOIA officers to get these records out. I know in the case of, recently it came out that Tom Malinowski didn't, file his PFD on time to announce that he had, made a number of COVID sensitive trades, and he released that after the fact. I'm not sure that's an example of the clerk's office of the House being slow-footed at any rate, but you can imagine a scenario where that might actually be a hindrance to a public disclosure and a public opposition researcher like myself to obtain documents like that could change the course of a race, because oftentimes those records clerks who are giving the information are the same ones who are filing records that can be abused. So yeah, certainly kind of many ways to skin the cat.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so we've talked a lot about kind of the thoroughness of good research. What is like the biggest sin or the biggest problem with bad research, and what does that look like? Like, how can you tell that you might
I'm sure it can blow up on you.
Yeah. Absolutely. I can't say we've been ever accused of bad research, I will say, but yeah. We have seen other individuals' products and been told, can we elaborate on this or do extra there? I'd say the most egregious example, and this is well known now because it's several years after the fact, but I mean the Ralph Northam example in Virginia, of not realizing that his medical school had a yearbook that could be queried or looked at in a public domain. I mean, can you imagine what the opposition's, how the opposition's campaign would have changed on a dime if that was in the public domain and able to be used late in the game or whenever, really, to shift the narrative and shift public sentiment? I think there are subtle ways like that where you might not realize it on its face, but when you're not doing your due diligence and not checking that box, it becomes apparent. And there are more egregious examples where you'll see a book and this person's been in office, let's say, for a decade, and you have only 40 pages of bad votes, and you ask yourself, well, there's kind of a mismatch there. There should be more content and comprehensiveness in analyzing more than this one issue or several issues to the extent that one has. So we try to kind of check all of our boxes very diligently and make sure that we are assessing all the possible vulnerabilities that are out there in the public domain, because leaving stuff on the field, leaving points on the board is just kind of a cardinal sin that you can't really abide by.
Yeah. Well, I'm glad you mentioned the Ralph Northam, just because it's important to remind people of that. Unfortunately, there's no re-elections in Virginia, but he just gets to have a free pass. That it is really remarkable.
I mean, I mean, it's so jarring. The fact that we had this, we're seeing this now with Andrew Cuomo. I keep going back to this. I'm a New Yorker at heart, so I'm equally outraged by this, where we have a Democrat majority now in the Virginia House and the Senate, and we had the same in New York. And this due process argument we hear for Democrats, is kind of the 180 of what we hear from the Republicans in power. They have no chance for due process, and there's no mechanism for accountability there. But we're seeing in the case of Virginia that there's kind of a hold your nose approach, because holding power is sometimes more important than the scandals that animate your base, and that's just the reality of politics, I think, in 2020 and 2021, unfortunately.
Yeah, on that, what are so when you think about the trends for this year and for next year, how do you see we're Republicans here,
Sure.
conservatives, but we do have Democrats also who participate in the show. So from the different perspectives, how do you see the trends going in research? Like, where are people going to be looking? Where are the things people should be aware of? What should they be? What rock should they be turning over?
Yeah, I think opposition research is often, what we put together is often a reflection of the current zeitgeist and the current political dynamics at play. So we often produce deliverables that reflect the top messaging points of the time. So, for example, leading up to 2016, the top messaging point for a Republican attacking a Democrat at a committee level or candidate level was, does this person support Nancy Pelosi for Speaker? What is the extent of their beholdenness to the Democratic machine? And then that transitioned into 2016. For the Republican side, especially, what is one's fidelity to President Trump? Are there any comments, public statements? Is there any money flowing around that shows a lack of fidelity or a high level of fidelity to the president's agenda? And I think now, in a post-2020 world, what we're seeing, there is still that question, that litmus test of fidelity to the president on the Republican side and where he stands. But increasingly, it's this more macro trend of attacking Democrats. Is it a BLM or Antifa, or is it these broad macro trends? Can we paint them and lump them into this broad bucket? And I think the question remains whether there will be more of a shift toward nuance that we saw kind of under the Obama years, where we're focusing more on issues like the debt or deficit spending, and looking at more kind of boilerplate conservative issues, and looking at where people are taking a stand on this. And I think the COVID stimulus bill that we just saw being passed today is a great example of that, where we're seeing a lot of Republican candidates and elected officials talking more about the nuts and bolts of how it impacts immigration, how it impacts deficit spending. And I believe that's where we're going to see we're going to see that return. I believe, I'm say, looking at kind of the nuance in the issues over time. The Trump element will be there, I think, on the Republican side, but the question increasingly will be, how are these dynamics, conservative dynamics, and policy points, at play in the research sense.
Excellent. Well, that's very helpful. It's really, part of what it is for people who are thinking about running for office, that they are checking off those boxes in an authentic way. I mean, you want to be the person that you say you are, but
Sure.
to make sure that you're not putting yourself sideways. So
Yeah.
these huge bills are going to be coming up. We're in the opposition right now, so we're
Yep.
in the minority. So we're not going to be the ones who are leading on the actual legislation in most cases, but it's going to be
Right.
deciding whether or not you vote for these big, bloated
And
things, and what's in there.
yeah,
What did
and
you vote for?
yeah, and at the state level, especially those omnibus bills where you have like all the bells and whistles attached, they're great for opposition researchers because even though on its face it can be like a great proposal supported by Republicans or Democrats, you can look at that bill and pull out one or two factoids and say, oh, you gave a tax break to yacht owners, or you gave a tax break to this individual, and you're able to kind of choose your own adventure essentially when it comes to these huge bills. It really comes down to how you want to message yourself and how you want to define your campaign. So bills like this are kind of a cornucopia for an oppo researcher.
So,
That's
Sean,
a
I want to
great
go to you in
point.
just a second with a
Yep.
question, but before that, for all of you watching, if you have any last questions or what have you that you want to put in the comments, whatever platform you're on, please do so that we can add those in. But go ahead, Sean.
Yeah, I just want to, particularly at the state level, and actually state legislators are doing this right now. So it's kind of crazy. In a lot of places, they're either creating or they're voting on budgets.
Yeah.
And the budget bills in particular, people don't get that this is where a lot of other policy happens besides,
Yes.
either we spent too much or too little. And
Mhm.
that's one issue, but it's a minor issue when it really comes to all the other things that might happen. And
Oh,
in
yeah.
some states, they've got formulas which will raise taxes and lower
Right.
taxes that the legislators have no idea about. They're just told,
Exactly.
hey, there's X amount of dollars and you get to spend it.
Right, and you can
And they
message
don't
that
ask
appropriately.
questions.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, certain states, they tie in school aid formulas and other attributes that actually can reduce funding for certain school districts in one's own district. And if you're voting on that because on the whole you have to pass this budget or this spending plan, as a result you're voting to take away funding from your school. You can message, that's a perfectly legitimate way of messaging one's vulnerability based on the facts at hand.
Yeah. Yeah, and so it's something as people are watching, if you're out there, you're in office and you happen to catch this episode, just knowing how all of this impacts your district, one, and two, really knowing what you're voting on. I think it is one of the drawbacks of these monstrous bills that no one reads is they truly have no idea what's in there, and they're counting on staff or whoever else, and in these state legislatures they don't even have a staff necessarily. So
right, they figure it out. They figure out what's in it when they pass it, unfortunately.
So,
well, you guys must be Percipient because one of our viewers asked that question as you were answering it about the big spending bills. So that's perfect, and how informative they can be for opposition research. So very good.
Yeah.
So Naji, when you think about this, so there's we have some people who are young folks who would like to get into politics. They'd like to maybe they want to be a campaign manager, maybe they want to be a media consultant, but maybe they want to be an opposition researcher. What are the, let's say, talents, skill sets, mindsets that really make for someone who's going to be a great opposition researcher?
Yeah, I think the real base element, the magic elixir, if you will, it just really comes down to, are you dogged? Like, are you dogged in your pursuit? Because, it doesn't take, not to sound braggadocious, it doesn't take like the brightest, brightest or sharpest mind to get into research. It really comes down to, are you willing to really, be dogged in your pursuit of information that's going to change the election, whether that's harassing the clerk for that record that's being stonewalled for you, or whether it's chasing down that lead and kind of being willing to jump into that rabbit hole that a candidate or a field staffer has told you might yield some fruit. And we aren't PIs by trade, but I think there's enough tools at one's disposal through open source methods that one can really leverage that kind of perseverance and that intellectual curiosity to get after it and really produce results for the team. And in terms of breaking into the field, I'd say there's no better way than volunteering on a campaign and providing this type of insight to individual campaigns. Volunteering at state or county or even the RNC or national party apparatuses to really get a ground level training in this skill set. Or if you don't have any questions and want to see what see what I recommend, feel free to shoot me an email or give me a call, and I'm happy to kind of steer you in the right direction.
Yeah, and I want to just to make sure that we tell people about where to go for the podcasters. In a moment, we'll give them the actual stuff because you can't see it on screen, obviously.
Sure.
But the last question that I have is, so first of all, thank you for those traits and skill sets. Dogged,
Sure.
curious, kind of a junkyard dog. When you have been involved in stuff that we're doing, there's definitely a sense that you want to find that thing that's going to make the difference, and that's it's very likely, just like the story we started this episode with, when you find out that your opponent's a secret pornography writer, it usually has an impact on the race. Not every opponent's going to be that, but you never know. A lot of people do some interesting things. So what sets Percipient Strategies apart from other research firms?
Sure. Yeah. Unlike a lot of the bigger shops in town that have pretty robust operations, they have, I call them a bunch of, recently graduated college students or some folks who are just really eager to get into politics and new to the field. We have, a pretty small and tight-knit white glove team where we have myself, the two partners I alluded to at the top, Matt and Tyler Ross, Matt Lentizana and Tyler Ross, and several employees. And what we do is, from the beginning of the client interaction to the end, we have each of us has our hands on the product, and we're able to kind of apply our own unique skill sets, both in the RNC and other capacities, to bring to bear the most value for our clients. So I'd say there are 3 or 4 elements, right? There's a speed at which we produce it, a top line or comprehensive deliverable, which varies from 2 to 4 weeks, 4-hour deliverables, which is, I'd say, pretty industry shattering, because oftentimes it takes months on end for people to marshal the resources and time to get this done, which makes you guys look good as consultants, because candidates always want the deliverable yesterday, let alone in the moment. So you have the speed element. The price element, we try to keep it as value conscious as possible. The budget of a U.S. Senate race or congressional race is not the budget of a county council or a state legislative race. There are budget constrictions, so we try to price it as competitively as we possibly can. And then there's also the comprehensiveness, the thoroughness, but also the kind of the strategic mindset and how we look at a race, right? The same hit or the same approach that works in a New York suburban race is not going to be the same approach that works in a Kansas race, right? There are different issue cleavages and different issue interests that will motivate a base to get out and vote or not vote. So we try to apply less of a cookie cutter approach and more of a strategic mindset in how we approach each race, and working with the client to identify the pain points, the pressure points, and how we can kind of use the information that's out there to kind of build it and buttress that narrative as best as we can. So I'd say it's those 3 things that really put us, kind of a cut above or differentiate us a bit more from a lot of our competition.
Yeah, I really want to talk to the notion of the strategic mindset and really taking, because you can get like an information dump and get a bunch of information and go, okay, great. What does this mean? Like, what can I do with this?
You have to go through all the same information, basically. It's just taking information from one place and putting it in another. And then the strategist has to read through War and Peace just to find the one page of information.
Right. And some people just send in scanned documents. Like I've seen documents that are 1,000 pages of just, scanned financial disclosure forms for 5 years worth that are 1,000 pages. And you, as the guy putting together the ad or trying to steer the campaign, are saying, well, what do I make of this? What do I do with this? I don't have time to sit here and read this manifesto or this treatise. I got things to do. I got deadlines to meet. So totally 100%.
Yeah, and I think really being able to get down to, and you mentioned it earlier, really taking a look at what the issues of the day typically are, and then getting to the core of who the person is. And I think that's really what we've noticed in working with you, is that you tend to get to those couple of things and that's really helpful, because being able to get to that quickly and without a lot of the other stuff, but saying, hey, there is something out here on this issue that then we get to put on our strategist hats and say, maybe that's something that's intriguing to see what could make a difference here, or no, you're right. That's a bit more of a rabbit hole that's not going to
Exactly.
make a difference. So
exactly.
yeah.
100%. Appreciate it.
Well, thank you very much for all that. My personal experience is that you do bring that dogged determination to find the thing that's going to make a difference in the race. Also, that strategic mindset. It really does make a difference to have somebody who can actually be a partner in the strategy. A team of a general consultant, a pollster, and the opposition researcher being able to work really well together to really figure out where you want to focus the research is really great. It's obvious the audience loves the show. Fascinating show. I really love the topic. We also had 81 shares. That's a pretty big deal. Thank you very much to everybody for sharing that. You can join the Share Force. Join Share Force, make a difference, reignite American patriotism. So thank you to everybody who are part of the Share Force, and we do appreciate that. But here, as we begin to close, Naji, I really appreciate you coming on and sharing your insights with everybody. We would like to get any of your last thoughts, but in particular, please let everybody know your website, email, phone number, how people can get a hold of you.
Sure, yeah. As you guys mentioned, my name is Naji Filali. Website is percipient.strategies.com. I'm a partner at the firm. That's PERCIPIENT. I know it's a mouthful, but it's percipientstrategies.com. Percipient meaning perceptive. My email is my first initial and my last name, N Filali, which is also a website if you don't remember this, but it's nfilali@percipientstrategies.com. And my phone number is also on my website as well. But in case you want to write it down, it's 845-709-4983. So happy to take calls, email, and I can steer you in the right direction, whether it's for obtaining research or learning more about the topic.
Excellent. Well, thank you very much, and we really do appreciate it. We'll have you on for other episodes as well, because you can always give people a little bit of the insight of what might be going on behind things. And you mentioned earlier the zeitgeist. Because you're an opposition researcher, you would definitely have your finger on the pulse of really what people are caring about at any given time. So great insight to have. But thank you very much. Really appreciate it. Sean, any last thoughts?
Yeah, well, Naji, really, thanks for giving of your time to us and our audience. They definitely appreciated it. So did we. I always learn something in these conversations, and particularly with you. When we've worked together in the past, get to learn a lot about our candidates and our opponents, and then getting to learn more about really the broader spectrum here was really great today. So really appreciate that.
You guys were great. Really thought-provoking conversation. A lot of on the nose questions, and I think I learned a lot too from some of the introspection and kind of thought-provoking conversation here. So appreciate that.
Great.
Awesome. Well, thank you very much, and everybody go check out Naji and his company, Percipient Strategies. Really do appreciate him being on. And with that, well, there we go. The official swag. We appreciate that too. All right. Well, thank you very much, Naji, and on Thanks, with guys. The show.
Thanks, guys.
Well, that was a lot of fun. It was great having Naji on, and I'm going to put up his information again for anybody who's watching that you can actually go and check that out. Naji Filali, partner, Percipient Strategies and Opposition Research. You can get him at infilali@percipientstrategies.com. Call him at 845-709-4983. Be sure to check him out and work with him and his colleagues, because you really need to have insight into what's going on with your opponents, with yourself if you're the candidate, or with your candidate if you are the campaign manager. It really will help you. I showed the message matrix earlier, and in the best campaigns we've done, all the really great campaigns, we've always really filled out these boxes with every piece of possible information you could have. And the opposition researcher and the vulnerability report on our own candidates are really what fills that in. And you're not surprised at the end of the campaign. You have an idea of where everything could go. You can block and tackle. You can, float like a butterfly, sting like a bee throughout the campaign. It really does make a difference.
Well, in the best campaigns, when you have the best research, you can actually see the path that the campaign's going to go on.
Mm-hmm.
Like, oh, hey, this is what we know. This is what we know about us. This is what we know about them. We know these hits are coming. Being able to really deliver that in a way that says, okay, we're ready for anything. So so really being able to take that into to a level that can deliver for you. That is what opposition research does, and a vulnerability analysis, as he referred to it, is really the thing that makes a difference. So
Yeah, it's this is not just new information. This book, Sun Tzu's The Art of War, from way back in the day, he talks about knowing the terrain. And I've talked about this as well, like a metaphor for strategies. Imagine you're at point A and you're trying to get to point B. Somewhere out there in the distance across all this landscape, there's mountains, there's valleys, there's rivers, there's all these things. This research is what's going to tell you what the landscape is. It's going to be able to help you make it through. It's the scouts, and in this book, in his treatise, the 13th chapter is called Employing Spies, and it's all about having those people who are out there who are going to tell you the lay of the land. They're going to tell you the dynamics that's going on. It's one of the most important chapters of The Art of War, and to this day, this is something that we employ in any kind of strategy. Whether you're a business that is, if you're Coca-Cola and Pepsi having your soda wars, you need to know what the other company is doing in order to navigate the marketplace yourself. So this is an important part of strategy, no matter what. People we teased it as the black magic of politics. The truth is, you really just need to have a clear view of the world. And we talk about our Olson strategy sweet spot,
mm-hmm.
which is, your strengths, your opponent's weaknesses overlapped with the voters' concerns. You get this with polling and talking to people, the voters' concerns. You get your strengths based on your vision and talking to voters, and your polling also will give you that in your biography. And then you get your opponent's weaknesses, and that's going to come largely from your opposition research and your polling. And the truth is, you just by doing the opposition research, you may not actually even be attacking your opponent. It's very likely that just knowing that they have a really big problem on taxes, when you start talking about your tax cutting plan to, spur job growth in your area, well, that your opponent's not going to want to talk about that because they have a terrible record on it. And it moves the battlefield. You're choosing the battlefield where you want to spend. So, there you go. This is a good question we have from the audience. Do they show you how to seal those records? I think that's going to be a conversation for a lawyer, but it's a really good question. Now, my experience is they pretty much give you an idea of what you need to handle. Like it's very likely people might have tickets that they don't know about. That's a pretty common thing for folks, and you just have time to go get that fixed. And it's understandable. People, they might be driving through multiple states and they forgot they had a ticket at one point and they got lost track of. So this is good. And let's see, any other questions here? Thank you for all the questions we got from folks today. Thank you for all the shares. This is really great. If you want to join the share force, you can join the share force, make a difference, and reignite American patriotism. Go to politicaltradesecrets.com and join us today, or reach out to us, or smoke signals, bat signal, whatever you need to do to get a hold of us. The other way to do it is to actually use our texting line. It's a great way to be in connection with us. So just text me at 202-918-3345. You'll get a text back with a link. Click the link. It'll have you opt in, and from there on out, it'll be a live text from myself or from Sean. You can reach out to us. We have conversations with people on the text community all day, and it's a great way to do that. By the way, if we should double check, make sure we don't have any questions there as well from the audience before we head to the end. So again, if you want to text us at 202 918-3345 to join our text community. And then additionally, to become a Political Trade Secrets insider, you can go to politicaltradesecrets.com, get exclusive stuff, and it's a great way to be part of the community as well. But with that, that is a great way to do that. And so let's see, with the questions from community, from our texting community. So what are some of the most important things that a candidate can do now when looking to hire an opposition researcher? Well, my opinion is that you need to go to percipientstrategies.com and you should check out Naji. I think that's the where I'd go. And then if they're booked, I don't know what the answer would be. I don't know who I'd go to next, but there's really good people out there, and we may have other opposition researchers on, but I would go to Naji first and check him out.
This is something where having a professional will make a difference. Some people go, well, I got a friend, they're an attorney, they've got access to LexisNexis, we'll be just fine.
Mm-hmm.
Well, except that they are not attuned to what to be looking for. And I think that was one of the things that Naji really talked about. And when you're going to miss some things, I think that's almost a given. In things could be missed anyway, but
yeah,
it's almost a given that it's going to be missed if you try to do it like, oh, a buddy, knows how to make requests. Mm-hmm. Well, that's all fine and good, but then who's going to actually look at it with that critical eye of what's needed and necessary for your campaign? And most of your friends don't necessarily have the capabilities to do that. So don't put yourself through that heartache.
Yeah, it can be very frustrating. We've been in a situation where there's not much money on a campaign, and you have to kind of use that situation. The thing about somebody who's done it before and has done a lot of it is they're going to have confidence. What he also mentioned, kind of that junkyard dog mentality, like we're going to tear through this. We're going to find the thing. It's that determination, and it's also the curiosity. A lot of people, they're just copying and pasting. It can get very easy to start just copying and pasting links, copying and pasting articles, and you just really just give you a data dump that isn't really helpful. And then that strategic sense, that comes from having been over a lot of landscape, over a lot of ground. You start to tell what matters and what doesn't matter. And that's something that comes from somebody who has that strategic mindset, has that determination, actually has an intention as to where they're trying to take things. Now, as a candidate and as a campaign manager and as a general consultant, you have to be very much a part of that conversation. And as the pollster, you have to be helping direct them, because an opposition researcher basically is presented with the entire world of information to go to, and you need to be able to help direct them towards what you think you might actually run the campaign on, because having them go spend a week working on something that you are never going to talk about, you're never going to think about, or maybe you have a real problem with and they don't know that about you yet. Well, that's gonna waste their time. We have another question. What do you do to be an intern or fellow? Let's cover it one more time, Sean. It's a great question.
Look, do you want to be an intern or fellow with us? Are you thinking about running for office, or want to just have a conversation about how to be a powerful political leader? Reach out to us at olsonstrategies.com, OLSON strategies.com. You can email me at Sean, SEAN, at olsonstrategies.com, or Dustin at olsonstrategies.com. And we'd love to have a conversation with you on any of those topics. So reach out to us today on that. We're also proud to be sponsored by Grassfire. What do? It's all of the one-on-one, human-to-human interaction your campaign can do. Canvassing, petitioning, live calling, all done by Grassfire. You can reach them at www.grassfire.us. They're the best in the business at delivering impactful conversations that help you break through the clutter, break through the noise, and have that impact with the voters. So reach out to them today. And that is also why they fuel 10centtexting.com. This is your way to connect with folks right where they are on their mobile device. Have that conversation, include an image, GIF, short video right there in the body of the text message. It really is remarkable. So reach out to 10centtexting.com today. And speaking of texting, Dustin,
yes,
we have a guest tomorrow that if you are a candidate, if you work with any nonprofits or any organizations that need to raise money at all, one of the ways to do that is through texting. And our guest tomorrow, James Martin from Rally Corp, will be talking with us about how texting can be used for that, and particularly the relational texting that can make such a huge difference.
Well, Political Trade Secrets this week is a regular hit parade. They just keep coming.
Yes.
We're going to have a couple of really amazing shows this week. I'm looking forward to talking with James about this. I do think this is one of the next things, as we have, one of the reasons why we're sponsored by 10centtexting.com. Really, texting was the breakout tactic of this last election cycle with the pandemic and everything going on. But you now are seeing that I think the best candidates who are strongest, we're using it here with our text community. You really have the ability to develop relationships with folks. And that is, it's a really just a great tool to be able to use it. So, James and folks like him have inspired me to have our text community, 202-918-3345 if you want to join that. And he will talk about how, if you are those organizations, how you can actually build that relationship with people. And I think that was the big insight that we got from this election cycle in 2020, is that texting, I'm just outside the millennial, so I'm Generation X, but I'm right on the cusp. And I was one of those people who didn't have a cell phone until, I think the very end of college, maybe after college. And that is not a typical thing for a lot of people these days. So it wasn't really something that I grew up with. And I maybe had a little bit of a bias, honestly, that, I don't really think it's the most personal thing that you can have. The truth is, though, it was much more personal of a communication tool than your typical live calls or other things, even though live calls came back as well as people weren't actually being able to communicate with people in person. They liked live calls in this last election cycle, but it's become that texting is actually a very personal way to talk to people and actually have real information, be really useful and of value to people. So I'm looking forward to this conversation to see how they have helped people raise money for their causes and how that can be applied to politics.
Yeah, I think that is something that we definitely saw during this election cycle. And we also saw how many campaigns and issues and whatnot left that ability on the table, like to actually communicate with people. And said,
someone would respond back or just go into a black hole.
Yep. So that's okay. So, so yeah, it's truly remarkable. So, but I do think there's something available there. So.
So check out James Martin tomorrow, founder of Rally Corp. We're excited to have him as well. Thank you to Naji Filali for being on with Percipient Strategies. Really, it is the hit parade. We're having all the greatest on this week, and just more and more amazing programs. Thank you, everybody, for joining the program with your comments and questions. We had a lot of really great comments today, really insightful comments, and really helped propel the program forward. Thank you again to everybody for joining us. As always, we really do enjoy these conversations. We enjoy your company, so thank you for stopping by. And we will see you again tomorrow with James Martin of Rally Corp talking about using texting to build relationships with your donors on the next Political Trade Secrets.
Join us next time by subscribing on iTunes and get show notes and sign up for our newsletter at politicaltradesecrets.com.